Dobro. History. Archive.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening the file on a scientific scandal. So spectacular, so interwoven with national ambition and outright deceit that it really did change how the world looks at big science forever.
It absolutely did.
We're going deep into the dramatic, catastrophic fall of Dr. Hwang Woo Suk.
And the date you really need to lock onto is November 24th, 2005. That's the day Hwang Woo Suk, who was, at the time, South Korea's supreme scientist and a global biotech icon, resigned from his official posts.
Right. Citing ethical transgression.
Exactly. But if you only remember the resignation, you've missed the entire story. That moment, it wasn't the end of a tragedy. It was just the first visible crack in the facade.
It was the beginning of the end.
It was the beginning of the public collapse of one of modern history's most sophisticated and, frankly, audacious scientific frauds.
Absolutely. And our mission today is to give you the shortcut to understanding this whole catastrophe. We're going to unpack the incredible socio-technical mechanisms, the nationalistic fever pitch, and the critical, tenacious investigation that allowed one man to deceive the world's top scientific journals for years.
And we really need to dig into how this alliance of hope, as some have called it, came together.
What do you mean by that, the alliance of hope?
Well, it's this powerful connection between a public that's desperate for cures, a state that's demanding global prestige, and this one charismatic scientist who's promising a miracle.
And that alliance, that consensus of desperation, it ultimately built this impenetrable firewall around the lie.
It did. And to grasp the sheer scale of the deception, you have to start with the magnitude of the resources and the political capital that were invested in Hwang. This was never just a case of scientific misconduct.
No, this was science as statecraft. The sources are really clear on this. The South Korean state treated Hwang's research as a matter of national security.
It sounds like an exaggeration, but it's not.
Not at all. I mean, think about this for a second. He was protected, 247, by agents from the National Intelligence Service.
The NIS, that's a privilege usually reserved for, what, heads of state?
Yeah.
Top political figures.
Exactly. And on top of that, Korean Air just gifted him 2 first-class tickets every year for 10 years. The financial backing was monumental. The Ministry of Science and Technology, or MOST, poured in roughly $27 million in state funding alone by 2005.
And that kind of money, that kind of protection, it doesn't just support a laboratory.
Well, no, it builds a national monument. And when you do that, questioning the monument starts to look a lot like treason.
So to understand the intensity of the collapse, we have to first look at how meticulously they engineered his rise. The ascent of Hwang Woo Suk, it was strategic. It was manufactured by the South Korean state.
And it aligned his scientific success directly with national destiny.
It's the key to the whole context. Like you said before, in the late 90s, early 2000s, South Korea was facing this huge economic choice.
Right, they had been this incredibly successful industrial fast follower.
Taking established technologies, producing them more efficiently than anyone else. But the government, especially under President Roh Moo-hyun, knew that couldn't last forever.
They had to transition. They needed to become a knowledge leader, someone creating the next generation of intellectual property.
And biotechnology, specifically stem cell research, was identified as the critical engine for that exact shift.
So Hwang Woo Suk becomes the face, the vehicle, for this entire national ambition.
He does, and his early work was genuinely world-class. We have to give him that. It set the stage for his elevation.
Yeah, these were real, verifiable successes. He cloned the dairy cow, 𝐃𝐄𝐄𝐏, back in 1999.
And then a pig in 2000. These were internationally recognized achievements that put South Korea on the map as a serious player in animal cloning. No question about it.
But then, when he shifted his focus to human therapeutic cloning, that's when the state's support just went into overdrive. The sources call it the technocratic anointing.
A perfect phrase for it.
Because the state literally created a title just to celebrate his potential.
They did. The Ministry of Science and Technology, MOST, created the title of Supreme Scientist, specifically and only for Hwang.
And this wasn't just some honorary plaque on a wall.
No, it was institutionalized protection and staggering financial freedom. That title came with an annual research stipend of about $3 million US.
$3 million a year.
A year. And you have to understand that's an amount designed to make sure he had absolutely zero administrative barriers, no financial concerns, just do the work, bring us the future.
When you tally the total investment, That $3 million a year was on top of the over $27 million in direct funding from most by 2005. And then the government authorized a colossal, what was it, US $132 million for the establishment of the World Stem Cell Hub at Seoul National University Hospital, SNU.
With Hwang, of course, appointed as its president.
And that appointment as the hub's president is so crucial because it speaks directly to the institutional failure we're going to see later.
How so? It didn't just give him status. It structurally insulated him from standard peer scrutiny. When you are the head of a massive state-funded national treasure project, a project that's seen as essential to the nation's entire economic transition,
You stop being just a researcher submitting data for review.
you become an untouchable figure. So, to question Hwang was seen as directly questioning the state's grand strategy. It established this powerful, what the sources call a techno-nationalist firewall.
And nothing reinforces that techno-nationalism better than the infamous Chopstick Theory. Let's just unpack this because it is genuinely one of the most fascinating and, frankly, disturbing parts of this story.
It's incredible. So when Hwang's team starts claiming all this success in somatic cell nuclear transfer, or SCNT, where all these major Western labs were failing, the question was obvious.
Right. How are you guys doing this?
Exactly. And SCNT is a brutally complex microsurgical procedure. You're trying to take the nucleus out of a human egg and replace it with the nucleus of an adult or somatic cell.
It requires just phenomenal precision. The human egg, the oocyte, is notoriously fragile.
Incredibly so. And Hwang's explanation for his team's success, it wasn't technical.
No, it was cultural. He claimed that the Korean cultural practice of using metal chopsticks, which are different from the heavier, bulkier wooden chopsticks used in other parts of Asia, fostered this unique level of fine motor skill.
Manual dexterity, he called it.
And he argued that this dexterity, learned from childhood, was the secret. It was the key to manipulating these delicate human eggs without causing damage.
It's an elegant piece of cultural engineering, isn't it?
It's genius, in a way.
He connected this cutting-edge 21st century science all the way back to ancient Korean traditions. He even suggested its origins dated back to the Goguryeo period.
So it didn't just explain their success. It provided this flattering, essentialist narrative for a Korean advantage. It told the entire country that they were intrinsically, biologically better suited for this incredibly specialized work.
And that created the perfect hero narrative. The domestic media just seized on it. They didn't just treat him as a brilliant scientist.
No, he was a secular saint, an economic savior. Sources say he was even compared to Admiral Lee Sun-shin,
The 16th century naval commander who saved Korea from Japanese invasion, a national icon of the highest order.
and that comparison served a really vital function. It set a precedent.
Yes, because Admiral Lee was famously persecuted and even jailed by jealous political rivals.
So the narrative became, any criticism or skepticism directed at our modern hero, at Hwang, must also be the work of envious rivals.
Or foreign-backed saboteurs, or even domestic traitors. And that narrative was incredibly effective at silencing any of the initial scientific doubts that were bubbling up within Korea.
So you have this national pedestal built on ambition and cultural pride. But it was anchored by what looked like genuine scientific authority, the 2 papers published in the journal Science.
These publications were everything. They didn't just cement his status in Korea. They fundamentally changed the global scientific conversation around therapeutic cloning.
So let's just ground ourselves in the science for a moment. In SCNT, therapeutic cloning is inherently difficult.
To put it mildly, you're trying to reprogram an adult cell nucleus to behave like an embryonic one, and that involves microinjecting it into an egg that's had its own nucleus removed, all without destroying the egg's delicate structure.
And the human egg is the most fragile part of that whole process. The success rate is astronomically low.
Which is the backdrop against which that 2004 paper landed, March 2004. This was the proof of concept. Hwang's team claimed they had created SCNTHES1.
The world's first human embryonic stem cell line derived from a cloned blastocyst.
I mean, this was revolutionary. If it was true, it meant that therapeutic cloning, this whole idea of creating tissues genetically identical to a patient to treat diseases without immune rejection, was biologically feasible in humans.
It validated decades of research in a single stroke. He became a global scientific rock star overnight.
And then came the 2005 paper, just over a year later, in May. If 2004 was the breakthrough.
2005 was the Industrial Revolution.
Exactly. This paper, with its huge list of 24 co-authors, claimed they had established not just one more line, but 11 patient-specific stem cell lines.
And this is where the sheer statistical improbability should have just set off alarm bells everywhere.
It really should have. They claimed they achieved those 11 lines using only 185 oocytes, unfertilized eggs.
And you have to understand, previous verifiable animal cloning successes often required hundreds, sometimes thousands of eggs, just to produce a single viable line.
Their claimed efficiency rate, about one patient-specific line for every 17 eggs, was just staggering.
It suggested that technology wasn't just possible anymore. It was robust, it was repeatable, and it was ready for the clinic. It turned a laboratory curiosity into a potential assembly line. It was, well...
It was too perfect.
Way too perfect. And this is where that consensus of desperation you mentioned really crystallized into the Alliance of Hope. The public reaction was immediate and profound.
When the World Stem Cell Hub opened in October 2005, right after that paper was published, over 3,000 people registered on the very first day.
And these weren't just curious onlookers. These were people desperate for cures for spinal cord injuries, for Parkinson's, for diabetes.
That real, raw human desperation, it provided the emotional fuel for the deception. The state wanted the prestige, the public desperately wanted the cure, and Hwang fed them both a lie that was wrapped up in cultural pride.
It created a feedback loop that actively resisted any kind of critical verification.
And that resistance was greatly aided by his global endorsement, specifically from Dr. Gerald Shatton at the University of Pittsburgh.
Shatton was crucial. He was the American co-author, strategically vital because he provided what the sources called the veneer of Western academic rigor.
He was the bridge to acceptance. I mean, if a highly respected American scientist is on the paper and is actively lobbying for its publication in Science,
then the international community is far more likely to just accept these incredible results at face value.
And what's really fascinating here is that the later investigations revealed Shatton's role went beyond just collaboration. He actively lobbied for the 2004 paper to be accepted without performing adequate due diligence on the data's veracity.
So he essentially traded his established reputation for a stake in what looked like the greatest biological breakthrough of the century.
Yeah. It highlighted a critical failure of the scientific star system, where the reputation of the researcher can sometimes eclipse the necessary scrutiny of the results.
Okay, so now we reach the pivotal moment of the turn. And it's so important to stress that this whole scandal did not begin because the scientific community or peer review discovered fabricated data.
That's a crucial distinction.
The entire structure was brought down because of an ethical breach, a problem with egg donation, which then pried open the door for the deeper investigation into the science itself.
Yes. The internal logic of the lie was first broken by a crisis of conscience. And that conscience belonged to the primary catalyst, a physician and former researcher in Hwang's lab named Dr. Ryu Young-jun.
Ryu had left the lab because he was deeply troubled by the ethical environment. And he was holding two critical secrets that basically formed the roadmap to the truth.
The first one was about coercion. He knew that junior female researchers in the lab were being pressured into donating their own eggs for the research.
Which is a fundamental violation of bioethics. It transgresses principles like the Nuremberg Code, the Declaration of Helsinki, things that require voluntary, non-coerced participation in research.
The pressure was immense. You have to picture it. These were young, often pre-tenure researchers working under a national hero.
The unspoken requirement for career advancement was total loyalty.
And donating one's own eggs became this perverse symbol of that loyalty, of patriotic sacrifice. And on top of all that, Hwang had been insisting publicly that all donors were unpaid volunteers.
A claim Ryu knew to be false. He knew paid donors were also used.
Right. And the second secret was purely technical. Ryu was deeply skeptical of those published efficiency claims. He'd been in the lab. He knew firsthand how incredibly difficult it was to culture those cells.
And even more alarming, he knew about Hwang's plans for premature clinical trials. He was worried they might test these therapies on a 10-year-old boy whose cells Ryu had personally extracted. He saw a potential medical disaster being driven by fraud.
So in what was a calculated and incredibly courageous move, Ryu Young-jun became the deep throat of this story. In June of 2005, he contacted a producer named Han Hak-soo.
From NBC's influential investigative program, PD Notebook.
Right. Now, at that time, Ryu didn't have physical evidence of, say, photoshopped images. But he provided the internal structure of the fraud, the ethical abuses, the deep skepticism of the technical claims, and that guided the journalist on where to start digging.
In this internal discomfort, these rumors, they quickly gained public traction when Shatton made his highly strategic move in November 2005.
Shatton's defection. The ethical rumors had been circulating for months, but Hwang had just dismissed them.
But Shatton, clearly sensing that the ethical dike was about to burst, abruptly severed all ties.
And his public statement was so carefully worded, he cited information suggesting that misrepresentations might have occurred relating to those oocyte donations.
Which was the first major international validation that something was wrong with the supreme scientist. It didn't confirm data fraud yet, but it shattered that image of infallibility.
And that was the confirmation the journalists at PD Notebook needed. Just 2 days later, on November 22, 2005, they aired their initial expose.
The title was Suspicious Egg Donation in Woo Suk Hwang's Myth.
And the broadcast laid out Ryu's roadmap. It provided evidence that Hwang had used eggs from his own junior researchers, that other donors had been paid, contrary to his claims.
And crucially, it exposed the structural failure of the Institutional Review Board, the IRB.
Right, we can't just say the IRB failed. We need to explain how it failed.
Because Hwang was the president of the World Stem Cell Hub, his allies effectively controlled the very IRB that was supposed to be providing ethical oversight for his research.
Exactly. The IRB became a rubber stamp. It completely bypassed the standard checks required on donor consent forms, on compensation. The man being reviewed was, in effect, the man in charge of the review.
This institutional capture meant the ethical red flags were never raised internally. It forced the entire burden of exposure onto external media and the courage of one whistleblower.
What's truly remarkable, though, is the immediate reaction to that broadcast. You might expect public outrage, right? Exploitation of young researchers.
But that is not what happened.
Not at all. Instead, the broadcast triggered a massive nationalist backlash. That techno-nationalist firewall was activated, and it aggressively targeted the journalists themselves.
Which brings us to the events of November 24, 2005. This became a national spectacle, a politically masterful, highly choreographed, televised press conference.
It was designed to execute what we can only call the strategy of containment.
Facing this now incontrovertible ethical evidence, and having been abandoned by Dr. Shatton, Hwang couldn't just deny everything anymore, so the entire nation watched as he admitted to the ethical lapses.
He did. He admitted to researchers donating eggs, to payments being made, but he framed it masterfully. It wasn't exploitation, it wasn't deceit. It was a byproduct of his noble, overzealous passion.
He literally said, "I was blinded by work and my drive for achievement." And by resigning from his big public post, the Stem Cell Hub presidency, the Supreme Scientist Committee, he was making this huge public sacrifice.
It was a brutal and genius political calculation. He was sacrificing the ethical pawn to save the scientific king.
The resignation was meant to satisfy the procedural demands, to silence the ethical critics, while maintaining that the core science, the 11 stem cell lines, the global breakthrough, was all still absolutely valid.
And essential for national pride. And for a brief period, that strategy was immensely successful. The South Korean public, so deeply invested in this hero narrative, just rallied behind him.
They saw his apology not as an admission of guilt, but as a humiliating concession to, foreign Western standards of review.
Standards they believed shouldn't apply to a patriotic scientist who is making such great sacrifices for the nation.
And this leads directly to the completely surreal I Love Hwang Woo Suk phenomenon. This was nationalism taken to a dangerous, dangerous extreme.
The website I Love Hwang Woo Suk mobilized thousands of supporters. They acted as the self-appointed Red Guards of the cloning movement.
And their targets were the perceived enemies, the journalists who had dared to air the truth. They framed the entire issue not as science versus fraud, but as Korea versus foreign jealousy.
The backlash against the media was immediate, and it was severe. Supporters threatened every single company that advertised on PD Notebook.
And the advertisers, fearing massive public boycotts and huge financial damage, just pulled their spots. All of them.
By November 26th, the program was forced to air with blank commercial breaks. It was a physical manifestation of the economic attack designed to crush the truth-tellers.
But the most visceral and frankly alarming display of this national fervor was the spontaneous egg donation drive.
It's hard to even believe. Thousands of Korean women posted these online pledges to donate their own eggs to Hwang.
They framed it as a patriotic duty. They were equating it to the national sacrifice of military service. They were viewing their own bodies as state resources to ensure the continued success of their national hero.
I mean, this level of cultural exceptionalism, it created an environment where science became completely indistinguishable from patriotism.
And meanwhile, the journalists were facing unimaginable pressure. The PD notebook producer, Han Hak-soo, and his team, they were getting death threats. Their families' photos were posted online.
They were branded as traitors and saboteurs. The narrative was that they were actively working to prevent Korea from achieving G7 economic status through its biotech prowess. The political pressure was all aimed at silencing the messengers.
So that the containment strategy could hold.
And it's important to emphasize just how close they were. The strategy of containment almost worked. The public narrative had successfully shifted the blame from the ethical violator to the ethical reporter.
But the PD notebook team, they knew that the ethical violation was just the tip of the iceberg. They had to pivot in the face of all this, from the ethics breach to the scientific fraud itself.
So despite the intense public shaming, despite the suspension of their own show, the PD notebook team persisted. Their focus shifted entirely to the integrity of the data.
This single-minded pursuit of objective truth is what ultimately broke the whole scandal wide open.
They knew the most vulnerable point was the efficiency claims, which were just statistically anomalous. So their pursuit led them away from Seoul all the way across the Pacific to Pittsburgh,
where a former lab researcher, Kim Sun-jong, was working with Gerald Shatton, and this turned out to be the smoking gun they so desperately needed.
Under questioning by the journalists, Kim Sun-jong, who had been involved in preparing the images for the 2005 paper, he finally broke his silence. He confessed that Hwang had directly ordered him to fabricate the data.
Specifically, the images of the claimed 11 distinct stem cell lines. They were not 11 unique colonies.
No. They were digital manipulations. The core lie was visual. He said images of just a few, sometimes only 1 or 2 actual stem cell colonies, were photoshopped.
Rotated, resized, contrast adjusted.
And presented as 11 distinct, patient-specific lines. The scientific Kane was literally wearing no clothes, but the clothes had been digitally rendered for the photograph.
This admission was absolutely explosive. But you have to remember, Hwang's support base was still fully mobilized.
His remaining loyalists immediately claimed coercion. They said the journalists had pressured Kim into lying.
And that period of doubt was powerful enough to trigger the temporary suspension of PD Notebook and even a public apology from the network, MBC, in December 2005. The truth was actually suspended.
But the journalists had already secured the one piece of definitive, objective evidence that no amount of photoshopping or coercion claims could refute: DNA fingerprinting.
They had managed, through immense personal risk, to get their hands on samples of the stem cells Hwang's lab claimed to have created.
And they also got the purported patient somatic cells they were supposedly cloned from, and they submitted all of these to an independent laboratory for a blind analysis.
The result, which landed like an intellectual sledgehammer, was just unequivocal, no match.
The DNA from the stem cells did not match the DNA from the patients they were supposedly cloned from. The central claim of both the 2004 and the 2005 papers was a total fabrication.
And the further analysis of the cells revealed something equally fascinating, didn't it?
It did. They were likely derived from parthenogenesis.
Virgin birth, essentially.
In cells, yes. It's a known biological phenomenon where an egg spontaneously begins to divide without fertilization or the necessary SCNT procedure. It's a biological accident. It just happens.
So Hwang's team hadn't created a miracle through their chopstick dexterity. They had simply identified cells that had started dividing on their own, something other labs had also observed, and presented this biological accident as the successful, efficient achievement of somatic cell nuclear transfer.
That realization just revealed the sheer depth of the deception.
And armed with this undeniable DNA evidence, and with the testimony of his staff finally crumbling, Seoul National University, which had been under immense pressure, launched its full internal investigation.
Their final report, released in January 2006, was the official definitive dismantling of Hwang's entire body of work on human cloning.
The SNU report confirmed total fabrication for both the 2004 and the 2005 papers. It confirmed there were 0 patient-specific stem cell lines.
And it detailed the true human cost and waste. Instead of the claimed 185 eggs, the team had used a staggering total of 2,061 eggs from 129 women.
It highlighted the gross inefficiency and the ethical lapses that defined his actual failed methods.
At that point, the verdict quickly moved from scientific disgrace to criminal prosecution. Hwang was indicted on multiple charges. This wasn't just administrative malfeasance anymore.
No, he was facing serious criminal counts. fraud for misleading the public and the state, embezzlement for diverting millions in research funds, and bioethics law violations for the illegal use of human eggs.
The legal fallout was extensive. While his initial sentence was relatively light, 2 years in prison suspended, the court ultimately found him guilty of misusing around $830,000 of research funds and of violating bioethics laws.
This supreme scientist was reduced to a convicted criminal. It was the ultimate proof that no amount of national pride can permanently shield objective data from the truth.
And the Wang scandal, it really can't be dismissed as just the failure of one deeply ambitious man. It exposed these deep systemic cracks in science, in media, and in state governance, both within Korea and globally.
Let's start with the global scientific community and what we might call the complicity of high-impact science. The journal Science itself faced immense criticism. They're in a constant race with rival journals like Nature to publish these epoch-making breakthroughs.
And that internal competition absolutely led to an expedited peer review process for Hwang's papers. When a paper comes along promising therapeutic cloning breakthroughs, journals tend to prioritize speed over rigorous scrutiny.
It highlights the dangers of the academic star system.
It does. Reviewers often afford famous, charismatic researchers a default level of credibility that less established peers just don't receive. In this case, reviewers failed to detect image manipulations that, in hindsight, were pretty easily spotted by digital forensic analysts.
And domestically, the role of the media, and we have to exclude the heroic PD Notebook team from this, was catastrophic.
They acted not as critical reporters, but as cheerleaders for the national project. They amplified the Chopstick Theory and aggressively attacked any skeptical voices.
That collective failure of critical distance allowed the fraud to just metastasize, completely unchecked. It's a profound lesson that a vibrant, skeptical media is a necessary structural check on science, especially when that science is tied to national identity.
Our massive corporate profits.
To really drive home the magnitude of the lie, let's just quickly run through the data again, the table of deception, if you will.
The claim, 11 patient-specific stem cell lines. The reality, 0. The few cells they did find were from parthenogenesis.
The claim, a highly efficient use of just 185 oocytes.
The reality, a grossly wasteful use of 2,061 eggs.
The claimed efficiency was roughly 1 line per 17 eggs.
The reality was 0 lines per over 2,000 eggs. The lie was systematic, and it was absolute.
Now, to make this relevant for today, we have to draw the parallel to a more recent analogous scandal that really relied on similar mechanisms of deceit, Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos.
The parallels are chilling. What's fascinating is the shared organizational tactics. Even though one was in biotech research and the other in medical diagnostics, both Hwang and Holmes used a fake it till you make it strategy.
And they relied on intense secrecy and structural compartmentalization to stop the truth from being assembled internally.
Think about it. Hwang photoshopped cells to prove SCNT worked. Holmes rigged her testing machines to fake the results. In both cases, subordinates like Ryu Young-jun in Hwang's lab.
Or Tyler Schultz and Erica Chung at Theranos.
Exactly. They only saw these small, departmentalized pieces of the operation. That structure was intentional. It prevented any single individual from stepping back and seeing the full fraudulent picture.
And the comparison is particularly chilling when you look at the burden carried by the whistleblowers.
Ryu Young-jun, who exposed Hwang, faced immense political and social pressure. He was labeled a racial traitor, a saboteur.
Which is exactly mirrored by the experience of Tyler Schultz at Theranos. He faced legal threats, character assassination, professional ruin.
Their stories highlight this critical structural vulnerability, the ongoing lack of robust protection for insiders who try to expose fraud, especially when that fraud is protected by a powerful national or market narrative.
What you called the state-sponsored hope machine.
Exactly. Which brings us to the bizarre patent paradox. Despite the definitive retraction of both science papers and the proven fabrication of all the data, Hwang was eventually granted a U.S. patent in 2014.
And for his technique related to cloning pigs.
Yes. And this demonstrates a shocking disconnect between what is considered patentable utility and what is scientific truth.
So the argument was that the method could theoretically work, even if his specific results were fraudulent.
That's the idea. And similarly, Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos amassed hundreds of patents based on fictitious data, which helped prop up their astronomical valuation. The system prioritized the potential claim over the proven reality.
And finally, we have to address the ultimate irony of this entire story, the Snuppy paradox. It's the tragic footnote that confirms his ability, even as he chose to deceive.
One of Hwang's highest profile claims was actually genuine: the cloning of the Afghan hound Snuppy in 2005.
Snuppy was real. He was independently verified.
Which confirms that Hwang did possess world-class animal cloning skills. His decision to fabricate the human data wasn't because of incompetence or technical failure in the animal lab. It was an active, conscious, and desperate decision to deceive the world in the face of this immense national pressure to deliver the human miracle.
The socio-technical imaginary he created, this idea of a scientific hero saving the nation through superior cultural dexterity, it just collapsed under the weight of hard, undeniable DNA evidence.
The scandal forced South Korea to confront the painful limits of nationalism in science. Scientific truth can't be willed into existence by patriotism or by state funding. It requires rigor, transparency, and a system that's capable of self-correction.
So the core takeaway from the Hwang Woo Suk catastrophe really serves as this permanent, chilling warning against the consensus of desperation. When that passionate desire for a cure or the ambition for a national victory overrides the tedious, difficult, rigorous mechanisms of scientific verification and ethical review.
The result is not a breakthrough. It's a system-wide catastrophe.
The hero didn't fall because of a simple ethical slip. He fell because the pedestal he stood on, supported by national pride, political ambition, and global scientific eagerness, was built entirely of photoshopped images and cultural delusion.
Which leads to the final question.
So we encourage you to consider this. Where are similar pressures? National pride, market urgency, the desire for an instant breakthrough, the charisma of a CEO. Where are those things still compromising ethical and verification boundaries today? What scientific or technological heroes are we maybe a little too keen to believe without demanding complete, verifiable data?
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the true cost of techno-nationalism.
We'll see you next time.